Okay, I think we'll wait 1 or 2 more minutes for folks to log on. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the reinvigorated and restarted California Estuary Monitoring Workgroup meeting. So hopefully you guys are all in the right place and everybody had a good weekend and is ready to start their Monday here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. Just a few housekeeping things. I wanted to let folks know that the meeting is being recorded. So make sure everybody's aware of that. I'll go ahead and give a little bit of overview in a second, but I think I'm gonna, if it's okay with everybody, given the number of participants, I'm going to forego introductions. And just if you know, and your name, affiliation, if you can, if it's possible to include your agency or organizational affiliation with your name, that would be helpful, because that way we can download the participant list. But just to avoid the chaos of going through like 40 different people trying to identify themselves. Also, we have a presentation, but I'm hoping to have a lot of interaction in this meeting. And so I'll let each of the speakers, as they go and when it gets to their turn of the presentation, they can introduce themselves. But if you have any questions, comments, you can use the raise your hand feature or use the chat feature. I have it open and I'll try to monitor that. And so please, you know, feel free to chat or raise your hand if you have questions, or you want some more discussion. We have a whole series of slides at the end, which we need to have some discussion on about how we move forward with the work group. And so we're hoping to get some good dialogue and interaction along the way. So before I get started, any questions or any of that on the logistics before we jump in? Oh. All right, well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Super. Adjusting here so I can see what's going on. All right. So welcome to the California Estuary Monitoring Workgroup meeting. My name is Eric Stein from the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. So I'll be serving as your facilitator for today. And one of the things we'll be trying to do at the end of the meeting is decide on some chairs and co-chairs of this group. So some of you may have been involved in the previous incarnation of the Estuary Workgroup, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And some of you may be new to this group. So we'll, in terms of our goals for today, so I'm gonna, in terms of our goals for today, we're going to spend some time talking about what we're hoping to accomplish with the work group. I'll start with, we've convened this work group. Hopefully you all know from the emails that the reason we've convened this work group is that there are various estuary monitoring efforts going on in the state of California. Some are statewide and some are region-wide. And we thought it was a really good time to reinitiate this group, which has been dormant for probably 4 or 5 years now, and kind of get focused again on ways to coordinate estuary monitoring in the state of California. It's a really exciting time because actually there's a lot of resources that have been dedicated over the last couple of years to really enhancing estuary monitoring. And with a lot of the issues we're facing, in addition to our historic issues of coastal wetland loss, now with all of the climate change and coastal resiliency concerns, there's a lot of attention being paid up to these coastal resources. So it's a really great time for us to reconvene, get together, and try to figure out how we can work best together to advance monitoring, assessment, and protection of these resources. So we'll start with a review of kind of what's going on in the state. And here's an opportunity. We've just picked a few of the major programs, but this is also an opportunity if there's other programs that people want to put on the table that we should be aware of, there'll be an opportunity to do that as well. A lot of our discussion today is going to be on what is, since this is a kind of a reincarnation of this group, what do we think collectively should be the goals of this group? What do we want to focus on? What are some of the primary or sort of initial work program efforts we might want to tackle collectively as a group? I did distribute with the agenda a draft charter. It's just a starting point, so we'll have some time in the agenda to discuss that and the structure of that charter, and also the leadership and kind of structure of how we're going to work together, how often we want to meet, what format that meeting is going to take. For those of you who have been involved with the work groups of the council in the past, these are largely volunteer and largely collaborative, right? So that means things only get done if we work together to get them accomplished. So we'll definitely be looking for folks to participate, kind of help us get done the things that we're trying to accomplish. So keep that in mind as we go through. Look, think about ways that you may be able to leverage efforts that you're already working on in your current primary job responsibilities to work with this work group and help us advance our collective goals. Before I go forward with the agenda, I just want to introduce a few folks I have on the phone who will also be presenting today, but and they'll introduce themselves. But I have Kevin O'Connor is going to be sharing with the presentation duties from the Central Coast Wetland Work Group, and Jan Walker from SQUIRP, where I work, and then Christina Toms from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board will also be helping out. And so here's our agenda, which I've sort of largely talked about. And so be thinking about that as we go forward. And if you have questions, just put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll try to get those as we go. And then maybe also other folks on the phone, Kevin, Christina, Jan, if you can help me monitor the chat and feel free to interrupt me if there's things that come up that we need to discuss. So here I have a slide, and I know Nick Martirano is on the phone, so I was going to put Nick on the spot for a second, but just to give a little bit of background, because this is a subcommittee or a work group of the council. And so I don't know, Nick, if you wanted to say a couple words about the council.
Sure. Hi, Eric. Hi, everybody. Thanks. So my name is Nick Martirano. I'm the director for the Water Quality Monitoring Council. There's a lot of good information about the background of the council on the website, which is mywaterquality.ca.gov, and just go to the About Us page. And I don't want to bore you with all the details, but it's a legislatively created group that was designed to address what at the time was a very disjointed monitoring program process and assessment of monitoring data. So the legislature basically required the two agencies, Cal EPA and Natural Resources, to come together and form this council. It's non-regulatory and it's really focused on collaboration and coordinating water quality monitoring across the state and across sectors. So not just the regulatory community, but also the people that are being regulated, as well as the public, community scientists, academia, the science community, citizen groups, and everything in between. We wanted to bring together all the monitoring data we could so we could collaborate and say, okay, who's collecting what where, how can we take advantage of each other's limited resources, and how can we then take the data and turn it into valuable information for decision makers or for anybody interested in the water quality throughout the state. So there are several seats on the council. Each one is designed to represent a monitoring sector. So we have the two co-chairs, which is Cali PA and CNRA. Right now it's Karen Mogus, and we're working on the co-chair position for the National Resource Agency, was previously Mark Gold. Then there's seats for stormwater, for POTWs, agriculture, water supply, the public, community science groups, research groups, so the scientific community, non-academic, and then we have one for the academic. We also have public health. So we're really trying to get all these sectors represented on the council to help address common issues and help develop guidance or recommendations upwards to the actual agency secretaries. The council itself is a high-level group, but the real work is done by these work groups, and there's 13 or so of them. They all try to basically address monitoring issues within a specific theme. So this one is obviously estuaries. There's others for wetlands. There's a harmful algal blooms work group. There's one for drinking water, one for safe to swim, which is primarily fecal indicator bacteria, but not solely that. Safe to eat, which is fish tissue monitoring. And so they're all trying to really take a big issue and kind of compartmentalize it by topic. And as Eric said, these are primarily voluntary. Sometimes there is some money that comes in when there's overlap with programs or grants, which is leveraged. But primarily this is the work of like common groups trying to work toward the common few goals, and they're as successful as the effort put into it by the work group.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. And then we'll have a general email for Nick at the end if you have want more information or anything like that. So for some of you on the phone may be aware that an estuary work group had been active from about the 2010 to 2018 timeframe. And that work group was focused largely on the San Francisco Bay Delta region. And so a lot of the effort of that was kind of focused, was kind of region specific. And so that effort sort of went into a little bit of a hiatus and has not really been very active for the last 5 years. They did develop an estuary portal, which I have a screenshot here, and has a limited statewide coverage. But one of the things that's going on right now with the Water Quality Monitoring Council is we're in the process of kind of updating a lot of the web pages under the council. And so this is also a good opportunity to reinvigorate, reimagine, and kind of refocus this work group, hopefully with a larger statewide focus. So some of you on the call were probably active in this earlier work group. And I think the main difference is we're trying to really expand the scope to be more comprehensive across the state at this point. So we felt that the timing was good for the work group to resume because, as I said in my opening comments, there's been multiple efforts that are in process or have been worked on over the last couple of years. You hear about some of those today. And so a lot of them have these common goals about understanding extent, distribution, condition, efficacy of programs, helping to prioritize funding and management decisions. There's a lot of overlapping goals between these programs. So we thought it was a good time to reconvene this work group to look for ways to coordinate, leverage, share information, share knowledge, and hopefully make all of our lives a little bit easier in terms of trying to tackle the challenges that we face. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this work group. As you can see with the bullets on the bottom part of the slide, is really use this as a forum to share information, resources, knowledge, ideas, tools, etc., as we move through the programs that we all collectively work on. This is a graphic. This is a graphic that from the implementation blueprint for the Ocean Protection Council's statewide estuary monitoring program. But I think it's a nice kind of starting point to think about what we're hoping to accomplish, which is this idea that there could be this sort of statewide opportunity. You can see the statewide estuary work group on the far left, upper left in yellow. And the idea is that we want to have these opportunities or forums for statewide coordination, but really most of the sort of action happens at the regional and local level, as many of you on the phone know, right? It all starts with on the ground actions and what's happening at these individual estuaries around the state, but that those efforts can be most successful if they're coordinated through these regional programs where we can bring people together to work on these efforts regionally. And then ultimately those regional efforts can be coordinated at the statewide level to allow us to answer bigger questions about the status and condition and health of our estuary statewide. What are the biggest stressors that are affecting those, and where should we prioritize our resources to help protect, restore, and manage those resources? And so this is kind of a general vision of how we're hoping that the Estuary Work Group can plug in and help support some of the statewide coordination that ultimately benefits things that happen at the local level. So what we're going to do next with that sort of broad overview, what we're going to do next is just quickly walk through a few of the programs that are ongoing within the state of California. So you'll hear first from Kevin O'Connor about the statewide Estuary Marine Protected Area, or EMPA monitoring program. And then Jan's going to talk a little bit about the Southern California regional program under our BITE regional monitoring program. Christina's going to talk about the San Francisco Bay Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program. And then I think, Kevin, you'll probably say a few words. We don't have any slides about the CCAMP, the Coastal Confluence.
Yeah.
Okay. And then again, at the end, we'll pause. And if there's other major sort of regional programs that we should be aware of, we'll have an opportunity for others to chime in on that. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Kevin.
And Eric, can you go back 2 slides just to that overview? Yes. So I just want to reiterate that the top left corner of the statewide estuary work group, everything to the right of that is very specific to our ideas for EMPA, but that everything on the right hand side could be any of the monitoring programs that we're going to be talking about today. And then but the estuary work group would be informing, hopefully, or coordinating between all of them. I just want to make sure that was clear to everyone. Cool, thank you. Okay, so our project, which we wrapped up back in December and we are continuing on with this year, was developing a framework for the condition assessment and monitoring estuary MPAs in California. Here you can see the team collaborators along the coast. We have a North Coast team, a Central Coast team, and a South Coast team, funded by OPC with input from the water boards. Okay, next. So the impetus behind this program, this project, was to develop an estuary MPA monitoring program. We have over 124 MPAs in California, 23 of which are estuarine MPAs, but there wasn't a consistent, cohesive way, an effective way of assessing the condition and the effectiveness of the MPA designation of these estuaries. So we've pulled together a great team, regional teams, and to put this program together over the past couple of years. So the overall goal was to establish a monitoring framework, including data collection, data analysis, data synthesis, and data reporting to determine the efficacy of MPA designation in estuaries in California. So beyond that, we're hoping that the framework we put together could be rolled into other monitoring programs, new monitoring programs, or existing monitoring programs to have this more consistent framework for estuary assessment to allow for easier transfer of data, statewide analysis, and statewide synthesis of data. Go ahead, Eric. The backbone of the monitoring framework are these 4 key principles: flexibility, comparability, interpretability, and practicality. So flexibility, being able to assess condition using this modular function-based assessment protocol that we pulled together. So we're not species specific or indicators specific. It's really looking at estuary function, developing indicators that address those functions. And due to the variety of estuaries in California, selecting indicators that are appropriate for various estuaries and utilizing those to assess the function of that estuary. Comparability, synthesizing across multiple geographic areas within the system, north, central, and south. Interpretability, having comprehensive and consistent sampling methodologies. So that's through having the development of those SOPs, consistency of those SOPs and their implementation, and the data framework behind them, management system behind them once the collection is complete. And of course, practicality, making the sampling feasible, the sampling campaign feasible. So we had to developed a 3-day sampling frame for each estuary. The idea you can get all the SOPs done within that 3-day time frame. Okay, next, Eric. Pulled together a great management advisory committee during the development of this program with representation of scientific groups, regulatory agencies, land management organizations. It helped inform the site selection, protocol selection, species indicator selection, and the final results. And many of you are on the call today, so thank you all for transitioning from the Mac over to hopefully this new revised CEMW. Okay, getting back into that framework. So the framework assesses the estuary condition using these ecosystem function-based approach. We finalized a list of functions here you can see on the table of 11 functions, 3, 6, 9, 10, yeah, 11 functions, there you go. And with each of these functions, there's a suite of indicators that can assess how the condition is functioning, looking at some ideal rate in the absence of anthropogenic disturbance and alteration. And from there, it just getting worse from the absence of disturbance to a lot of disturbance. So I think we'll zero in here on one of those functions. So here you can see along the left-hand column, this is a subset of these function to indicator tables we put together. Left-hand column is the individual function. The top rows are the indicators with the green bars representing which indicators inform which of the functions. So we have multiple indicators that can be used to assess a given ecological function. Again, because estuary variety throughout the state, you can't have always a single indicator assessing a single function. Allows for adaptability across the state. To prioritize the indicators for inclusion is based on the key ecological functions of interest to a monitoring program. Again, designated goals of your framework and incorporation of indicators currently or previously being used in other programs. So allowing for existing programs to feed into this new framework. These are the suite of monitoring protocols we tested across the state. So we had been grouped into abiotic, biotic, general habitat condition, and then watershed processes and stressors. You can see up at the top, we had in situ water sampling probes, collecting long-term data. We also brought out YSIs while we were doing the data collection to get point-based in time water chemistry and sediment nutrient samples, water quality nutrient samples. We also took sediment cores. We did fish surveys with seines and bruvs, crab surveys and benthic invert cores. Then we used CRAM. We did topo surveys and marshplain vegetation surveys. Did a limited amount of SAV surveys. We did some EDA data collection, and then we also looked at marshplain accretion rates, setting the foundation for looking at that by deploying feldspar throughout these systems, but not actually getting at the accretion rates yet. Then finally, we did some GIS-based analysis, looking at landscape stressors and historical habitat change analysis. Lots of protocols, and we developed an SOP for each. Go ahead, Eric. So here's the mega table. You can see all of the ecosystem functions along the left-hand column, and then all the various indicators along the top row, and the various green squares linking each of those to each other, allowing for the assessment of function. So depending on the program you're monitoring for and the functions of interest, you can select a function and then identify which various indicators you would want to collect within the estuary to answer that function-based question. Here's an overview of the sites and the teams. So 15 sites is where we assessed utilizing these protocols, about half of which were estuary MPAs and half of which were control sites. Each region, north, central, and south, had 5 estuaries to assess, and here you can see the teams. And they were representing both perennially open estuaries as well as temporarily closing or barbell estuaries, and a range of size as well. Go ahead, Eric. And then a large infrastructure of data sharing and data management was developed by the folks down at SQUIRP. Here's our website, empa.squirp.org, where all of our reports, presentations, SOPs, data templates, and our data submission tool are available. We can also get data out of the system now, so you can put input and take it back out. And then all of the flat files have been uploaded to Data One, which we will continue to do into the future, as we do have another round of funding now to do another round of assessments. A suite of products that were developed as part of this initial development process, a tech memo, the various SOPs, data templates, COC forms, the website, data tech system, and then our various reports, the project summary, the data analysis report, and the program implementation blueprint. all of which have been finalized this week, I believe, and will be uploaded to our website and Data One. So we put together 4 different reports, one focused on the development process, one focused on the data analysis, one focused on implementation, and then one the actual SOPs. So 4 individual reports.
Okay.
I think that's it, right, Eric?
That's it. Yeah. So that was kind of just a
Okay.
quick overview of a lot of stuff. So let me pause there before we transition. And again, the idea was we are starting with the kind of the statewide. This is a statewide program, and then you'll hear about 2 regional programs, one from Southern California, one from the San Francisco Bay region. But let's stop here and see if there's any questions or discussion about the statewide EMPA program that Kevin just walked through. Again, this is kind of a starting point because it is something that was developed with a statewide focus. And I can't actually see the chat on my other screen, so once somebody else will have to let me know if there's any question.
Sorry, Lauren, we do not. I will put your logo on that slide.
Okay. Any other questions or?
So I have a quick one.
Yeah,
Can you guys, so
hey, Doug, can you just introduce yourself so people know who you are?
yeah, sorry, I joined late. Doug Gibson, I'm the executive director and principal scientist for Nature Collective down in San Diego. So, and this statewide, like in San Diego County, sampled bataquitos, and the map went away. And I apologize. I had major family emergencies that happened, and so I've been out really for 2.5 months. But I'm back and want to try to get re-engaged. I saw Bataquitos was selected, and I didn't get a chance to see, like, is Tijuana the estuary as opposed to sort of a bay-like function for San Diego?
So, or Kevin, you want to answer?
No, go for it, Jen. Go for it.
So for the original pilot of the EMPA program, the furthest south site that we have is Bataquitos Lagoon. So we don't have a San Diego site. As we move towards, and what I'll talk about next for the BITE program, and as you know, we're including more sites in Southern California that will use this framework.
That's all yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions on the statewide program before you transition? Anything in the chat? No. Okay. All right, so now we're going to transition. Jan's going to talk a little bit about the BITE program. And then
Oh, actually, Eric,
Yes,
Wayne
there's
just
one
asked.
question.
Yeah, Wayne just asked how are SQOs used?
oh, the Center of Quality Objectives. And who asked that question?
Wayne.
Okay,
Thank you.
hey Wayne. As just as a little bit of background, most of you know that the state has sediment quality objectives. They generally apply to subtidal habitats. And so right now, so it's a kind of, I'll give you a 2-part answer. In the subtidal portions, so we didn't directly run sort of the SQO framework. We have data that the data that we collected can feed into the SQO analysis for the subtidal portions of these estuaries. The EMPA framework and the estuary program is much broader and more inclusive than just the subtidal habitats. And that's one of kind of the really cool things about it, is it includes kind of the estuaries in the larger sense. So everything from kind of high marsh and even some of the transitional areas all the way down into the subtidal habitats and the subtidal channels. So it's a much broader kind of perspective on the estuary. So Wayne, one of the things we're hoping over time through this program and through the BITE program is that we can continue to collect data, chemistry, toxicity, and benthic data, as well as other data that hopefully can help us understand how the SQO framework could be applied to some of the other habitats, some of the brackish or lower salinity areas, or maybe even some of the intertidal areas. So those tools, as you know, don't currently exist, but we're hoping that some of the data that's being collected now can hopefully help us think about SQOs for some of those other habitats beyond the subtidal habitats where the framework currently applies. So did I answer your question, or is there You can, if you want to have anything else we want to talk about on that, Wayne?
He says thanks.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, take it away, Jan.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jan Walker, and I'm an estuarine ecologist at the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. I'm working with Eric, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of an existing monitoring program, the Southern California BITE program. Many of you are probably familiar with it as a program that hasn't traditionally focused on estuaries. So this monitoring program extends from point conception to about Punta Banda. Some years we sample in Mexico, other years we don't. And it was really born from the frustration of environmental managers' inability to answer simple holistic questions about the Southern California BITE coastal environment. It was initiated in 1994. But it has grown since then. And so it's really an integrated, coordinated monitoring program answering basic questions about environmental status and trends. And it really focuses on current management needs and document success of management actions. It was originated by 12 agencies, and it was first limited to just looking at the continental shelf. But since then, the program has really grown to approximately about like 100 agencies, sampling sites ranging from the head of tides and estuaries to the deepest shores, ocean basins, about 1,000 meters. And so it's not just a regulatory mandate, as the BITE was created, and a lot of regulatory agencies use this to look at the health of the continental shelf, but it explores many new problems and documents success of management actions. Go ahead, next slide, Eric. And so it has many different elements. It was originally started with sediment in mind, and as Wayne brought up, from the BITE program, a lot of the SQOs was born, but it has many other elements. And so this year in 2023, we're looking at 7 different elements: water quality, harmful algal blooms, microbiology, trash and microplastics, submerged aquatic vegetation, and also estuaries. And that's where we'll really be focusing on as a part of this group. And so what we're planning to do and what we've already started, so a lot of our initial planning is already going on, and you can definitely reach out to me if you want to join our work group. But the goal of our new estuary element is to have this broader regional integrated estuarine condition assessment. So previously, estuaries have been one of the strata that are part of the BITE program, but it's only been focused on the subtidal area. So if any assessment in areas in estuaries has occurred, it's just been in those subtidal regions. And so now we're going to take the EMPA framework that Kevin was talking about and expand it into estuaries, looking across all of the different habitats, so marshes, intertidal. And we're looking at sampling about 25 estuaries right now. Well, this will include multiple indicators, multiple endpoints, and all of those ecosystem functions. Yeah, go ahead, next slide, sorry. So we have many different participating agencies. One thing about the BITE is it follows the model of you kind of pay to play, both within like in-kind contributions, offering field time. And so we have all these different great organizations from federal agencies, state agencies, local governments, as well as all of the different collaborators or different organizations like the SONGS organization. So I know Kat and Rachel are on. The NERS are participating. So Jeff Crooks is also on. So we're really trying to leverage existing efforts to really compile all this estuarine data with using BITE as kind of our leveraging agent. Okay, so for this this year, we have 5 specific questions with this big fundamental question of what is the relative condition of Southern California estuaries based on a function-based assessment. So this is using the EMPA framework. And then with that broad question, we're hoping to answer a series of sub-questions as well. One focusing on what are the sensitive fish and bird species that are observed in Southern California. So this can leverage some of the CDFW efforts that are going on that are specifically looking at rails, as well as the Tidewater goby. We have a third question that's really focused on resilience. So what is the range of sea level rise resiliency scores? And so we'll be leveraging efforts that have already existed. I know some of you might be familiar with the Mars indicator, so more of these specific sea level rise indicators. Fourth question is, what is the relative risk of estuary condition to major stressors? So here we'll be focusing more on specific stressors that our work group has identified, such as maybe nutrients, toxins, or any other broader stressors that may come up from the other elements as well. And then our last big question is, what is the relative condition of estuaries based off of different levels of management? And so here we're looking, we have about 25 estuaries that are participating, all managed in different ways. So we're hoping to see how these different comparisons shake out in the sense of how condition might change based off of management or other types of conditions such as mouth condition, basin size, or restoration status. And so here are estuaries. That number keeps changing, 25 estuaries, 27 estuaries. It keeps changing because we're still recruiting. Every day I'm talking to new people, trying to get more estuaries, but as you can see, we have a pretty broad expanse. We're missing some of maybe more of our northern estuaries, so we're looking for some partners here. I just want to stress that we really rely on the local groups to do a lot of the monitoring. We'll be monitoring starting in October of 2023 with a lot of our training happening in August. The plan is to use the EMPA protocols with the understanding that a lot of institutional monitoring already is occurring. So we're not necessarily asking the SONGS group or the NERS group to change their protocols, but rather how can we assimilate their data with the EMPA data, hopefully moving towards being able to compile a bunch of monitoring data. So here is just another, we're focusing on 8 abiotic water quality indicators, 9 biotic indicators, and 5 landscape indicators. We're hoping to produce some graphics like this where we can look at condition score and compare it across management type. So I also want to end that this is right now just a single element for 2023, but we're hoping that we get a lot out of it. We gain a lot of traction so we can do a broader estuary assessment moving forward in BITE, and our BITE cycles happen every 5 years. I think that's the last slide, right, Eric? I think you're muted.
Right. Any questions for Jan or comments before we shift up to the San Francisco Bay region? Go ahead, Doug.
Just a quick question. Is there a list of all 27 in that I could find somewhere?
Yeah, Doug, I'm going to be sending out the final work plan that we've been working on this week, and that has a list, but I'm happy to share that with the broader group when we send out our meeting notes as well of the work plan of what we're thinking of doing for BITE. It also shows where all of the effort we have and where we're hoping to still get effort to. We're still working to, get some of the back end processing sampled and things like that. So I'm happy to share that with you. And I actually can drop the list right now into the chat too, which might help people.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jan about the Southern California effort? And again, this is a great example of where we're leveraging all of the work that OPC funded to develop the EMPA framework that Kevin talked about and apply that to the regional program in Southern California. So these are what we're hoping to do more of around the state. So any questions in the chat or anything like that for Jan before? Nope. All right, everybody's still waiting for that first cup of coffee to kick in. All right, so if there's no other questions, and so get well caffeinated because I'm going to be asking for some input in a few after Christina's done with her presentation. So I'll turn it over to Christina. She's going to take us up to the San Francisco Bay region, talk about work that's going on up there. So take it away, Christina.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Eric and the rest of the team for putting this together. So I'm Christina. I'm an ecological engineer and senior scientist at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. I've been involved in the formation of the San Francisco Estuary Wetland Regional Monitoring Program since it started back in, I want to say 2017, 2018, maybe. Broadly, this is a really collaborative effort. The regional board is one of many members of the steering committee. It includes a host of partner state agencies, such as the Coastal Conservancy, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Interagency Ecological Program. There's a few folks on this call that are involved in the WRMP. I'd note that Caitlin Crane, our lead scientist at SFAI, she's also here on the call. And so broadly, so I think, Eric, I think the slides I gave you dive right into our science priorities, because I don't know how to talk about the WRMP in less than 20 slides, but oh, there you go. Great.
I
We
put
do have the
the
overall
goals.
goals.
I put the goals and focus slides in there for you, Christina.
Oh, thank you. I adore you, Eric. Thank you. So, broadly, there's already so many ongoing monitoring programs within the estuary, but none that are explicitly focused on tidal wetlands. Broadly, we're modeling the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program after the Bay RMP, which has been going on for about 3 decades now, which is a collaborative effort amongst dischargers and stakeholders in the Bay area to monitor water quality within San Francisco Bay. And what this effort is trying to do is really trying to expand that science framework and expand that collaboration into the Bay margins to more effectively understand how we can restore and manage the region's tidal wetlands. So broadly, the goals of the program are to assess the influence of landscape scale drivers, particularly climate change and watershed management. So that's actions such as water management, development, assess the influence of these drivers on tidal wetlands across multiple scales of space and time. We want to develop a consistent approach for implementing and contextualizing the monitoring for tidal wetland restoration projects that's typically required by regulatory agencies. And we're trying to develop information to support decision-making by tidal wetland conservation and restoration stakeholders, such as land managers, project funders, designers, regulators, and so on. Currently, tidal wetland restoration in the estuary is funded by a number of sources, but particularly the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, which is spending $25 million a year every year for 20 years to fund tidal wetland restoration and conservation in the estuary. And so given that, and that's funded by a property tax on property owners in the 9-county Bay Area. And so we have a real need to deliver to voters and to public officials and to stakeholders really reliable, consistent information. Right now, so much of monitoring is really permit driven. It's very patchwork. It's not contextualized. It can't really be, the data can't really be assessed across multiple scales of space and time. And so the WRMP is trying to fix that. Next slide, please. So our scope and focus is the San Francisco estuary downstream of the Delta. We are partnering with IEP and the Delta RMP and the fish restoration program and all of those the environmental monitoring program, all those different Delta monitoring efforts. And I think eventually there is a vision of having a more coordinated science enterprise across the entire estuary. The Delta is certainly way ahead of us on that. And so we're trying to build an equivalent science program downstream. So it's right now it's limited to the jurisdiction of the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board, but we do hope to build a science bridge between the upper and lower halves of the estuaries. Next slide, please. So like many of these monitoring programs, we are based on the Wetland and Riparian Area Monitoring Program, that framework established by the Water Quality Monitoring Council. And so the guiding questions around which our framework is built are, what are the region's tidal wetlands and wetland projects, and what are the net landscape changes in area and condition? How are external drivers such as accelerated sea level rise, development pressure, changes in runoff and sediment supply impacting tidal wetlands? How do policies, programs, and projects to protect and restore tidal marshes affect the distribution, abundance, and health of dependent plants and animals? What new information do we need to better understand regional lessons from tidal wetland restoration projects in the future? And how do policies, programs, and projects to protect and restore tidal wetlands benefit or impact public safety, health, and recreation? And so we have a number of science priorities that derive from these guiding questions. Next slide. We have a very robust science framework. I won't dive into all of these elements, but it's broadly based on a master matrix that crosswalks monitoring questions and indicators, conceptual models that help us understand triggers and thresholds of change, a space-time framework that helps us understand how we can monitor and assess change at different spatial and temporal scales, and then a very robust data management management strategy. And a lot of this is being done in together with the science team at SFEI, to be clear. Next slide. And here's just an example of all the different indicators that we anticipate monitoring across different scales of space and time, really understanding the physical and ecological drivers of condition and of regulatory endpoints that are of interest to stakeholders. Next slide. Let's skip this slide and we'll go to the next one and the next one. So we have just this is way too much information, but these are the level 1, level 2, level 3 indicators that we anticipate monitoring. Next slide. Again.
I think this is your last slide, Christina.
Oh, is this the one? Oh, okay. Oh, I thought I had the science priorities in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so apologies.
Yeah.
So so our science priorities are really broadly focused on mapping, develop a balance change base map. So we're doing regional mapping of habitats, landscape features, elevation, vegetation. We anticipate implementing CRAM at a number of our sites throughout the estuary, and also collecting level 3 data related to physical processes and ecological conditions. So elements such as improving our spatial and temporal coverage of fundamental drivers like water surface elevations, marsh 3D elevation and topography and edge change, shifts in vegetation communities, shifts in salinity, all of these different factors. So really happy to answer questions about this. It's a really big program. We're just beginning implementation. We're developing our base maps, developing our SOPs for data collection. We are beginning to, we have the skeleton of a data management framework. And we're going to start monitoring this year. And then by the end of this year, we're developing a monitoring plan that's going to describe which indicators we're going to monitor at which sites throughout the estuary over the next 3 to 5 years. And then we're going to roll out that plan for, we're linking it up with funding opportunities and moving from program planning into program implementation. So are there any questions about that? Way too much information in too short a time span?
And we will make all these slides available. Nick Martirano has a copy of the slide deck, so we'll make sure those get posted and distributed.
I had one quick question about, you said the funding was, is it 25 million for 20 years or 5 million?
So I just want to be clear, our program is currently primarily funded by EPA, Region 9, as well as the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. The Restoration Authority has $25 million a year for 20 years to fund tidal wetland restoration and conservation in the estuary.
Perfect.
So that was a voter driven, that was Measure AA a couple years ago. That was voters confirming the development and the funding of the Restoration Authority. And so the program is not, we do not anticipate, we're examining our funding options. We would love to have a permanent funding stream from the Restoration Authority, but that may or may not be, feasible. But right now, there's certainly a key partner.
Super. Thanks, Christina. Any questions for Christina? Anything in the chat? Okay. So I'm going to open up the floor here in a second for other programs, and Kevin might want to talk about the Coastal Confluence Program. But I just wanted to point out, and hopefully all of you sort of saw that, the WRMP and the BITE program, there's a lot of common elements there. So you heard all about, there's a lot of overlap in some of the questions, indicators, need for data management and data sharing. So you heard a lot of common concepts and ideas there. And so again, hopefully that illustrates why we think the timing is right for this work group to come together and help us coordinate these efforts and hopefully minimize reinventing wheels and maximize sharing ideas and resources because we're all sort of resource constrained in our various programs. So before we get into kind of the next phase of the agenda, which is going to focus on the mechanics of the work group, that what we just presented was just kind of a little bit of context and background on things that are going on. So let me open up the floor here, and I'll start with you, Kevin. If there's other programs that we didn't necessarily prepare slides for, but we should have on the table as key regional efforts or statewide efforts to be aware of.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the CCAMP coastal monitoring coastal confluence monitoring program. So the Central Coast Water Board has its Central Coast Ambient Monitoring Program. And as part of that program, they have a coastal confluence monitoring program with sites that they revisit on an annual basis, monthly, I believe. I don't know if they've got it up and running again since COVID. I know during COVID, they stopped doing data collection. So I don't know the current status of the program, but they do go out and do water quality monitoring at coastal confluences. So they're not actually down in the estuary, but they're at the interchange between stream and estuary. I don't know the number of sites. I'd have to look that up. I can reach out to the water board. It's just another group that we can potentially interact with as far as estuary monitoring.
Kevin, do they have a website that you can drop or anything?
Yes, I will search for the CCAMP Data Navigator.
Because I will put that in the notes.
Any other sort of regional programs that folks on the call? There's 40 of you, so any of that we want to mention or make sure, because I think the idea is we want to make sure we have at least some preliminary awareness of some of the major regional programs throughout the state. Anything we missed or should be aware of, and we can always, agendize these for future meetings. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And thanks, Christina. I just wanted to put in a plug for the fish restoration program that Christina mentioned and some of the work that IEP is doing and documented. It's on our website, and I dropped the link in the chat so people can find out more there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then I see Rosie, your hand up.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to also follow on Steve's thing with coastal monitoring program for CDFW, which is pulling together all the anadromous fish information. So that's something that you guys, might want to make sure you are aware of and integrate in. It's not necessarily something that you would necessarily be doing, but good data.
Super. And that's Rosie from the Santa Monica Mountains RCD. I just
Sorry.
Steve, did you have something? Yeah, go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that the Pacific Marine and Estuarine Fish Habitat Partnership has also compiled lots of information about the spatial extent, historic and current for tidal marshes, for estuaries proper, has all of that available for eelgrass beds, all of that available for the whole West Coast. And could be used for CMEX GIS, spatial data.
Great.
Thanks.
And CMEX, for those of you unaware, do you want to talk a little bit about or define what the classification system?
Yeah, it's just the federal standard for classification of polygons, the GIS system that we're all using up and down the coast amongst most of the programs. Common currency for spatial data along the coast.
Great. And this is great. And Nick, I'll get to you in a second, but this is great because I think one of the initial work products we're contemplating is just even getting an inventory of these programs and what data is being collected so that we can share that among the group and make that more readily available to everybody. So this is great information. And I know Jan's catching all this.
Yeah, if you guys could just post the links, I'm just gonna compiling the name and a link would be helpful.
Yeah. Nick, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I don't know if I would go so far as to call it a program with a capital P, but just want to flag that, we've been trying to pull together a lot of state parks' statewide estuarine data here at our Natural Resource Division headquarters in Sacramento. So please feel free to, reach out, and thanks for having us here and keeping us involved and hoping to have some more concrete data products to share.
Super, thanks. Okay, others? Again, and this won't be, we're envisioning, this inventory will be more of an ongoing effort, so there'll be other opportunities, but I just wanted to make sure we gave everybody on the phone an opportunity to chime in with programs that they may be involved in. All right. So with that, so hopefully we're going to transition now from talking a little bit about the programs to where we're looking for more interaction, but hopefully I've sort of beat this drum enough today that it's the timing's good, and we really want this work group to be a forum for dialogue and sharing of ideas and information. So with that, what I want to do is transition with the agenda. We took a starting point. All of the work groups under the council, or most of them, probably have some sort of charter. The charter is really helpful because these work groups hopefully transcend the period of time that specific individuals are involved. And so it's important to kind of get down on paper what the sort of objectives and mission of the work group is, and kind of how the work group is envisioned to be structured and operated, so that as individuals sort of transition in and out of different roles, there's some continuity among the work groups. And it's also helpful for people who are interested in potentially getting involved in the work groups or may want to learn more about them. They can refer to something that gives a little bit of background about what the goals and intent of the work group are. So we took a first cut at drafting a charter and modeling it after charters that other work groups of the council have developed. And so this is definitely a straw person for starting. And so I wanted to just step through. You have it all in a Word document, and if we want, I have it on my other screen. We can bring it up and do some editing on it. But the goal is really not to wordsmith at this point, but really to see if we have captured the correct broad concepts and ideas that we want to include in the charter, or if there's anything missing, any major elements that need to be included that we haven't included, and have that level of discussion. And then we can revise the charter, and then take additional specific comments by email and iterate on it between now and the next meeting. So what I put up here on the screen, I just cut and paste these out of the Word document that I sent you previously, is the mission. And so I won't read it to you because I know you're all can read and you can see it on the screen, and you have it in front of you. But the mission of the work group and sort of how we intend to accomplish that mission through this coordination and exchange among the various different groups in California that are working on these issues. So let me pause there and open up the floor for some discussion and get some feedback from folks in terms of the mission. Does it resonate with people? Are there kind of key elements that are missing or need to be talked about before we move on to the specific objectives? So I'll pause there. Any feedback, comments, input? Looks perfect as is.
Looks perfect, Eric.
Okay, I see a hand, Mark Carr. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, hey, thanks. So just for clarity, this charter looks like it's with respect to the broad overarching goals of the Estuary monitoring work group.
Correct.
Under which the MPA monitoring and evaluation is one element, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
so
correct.
I don't think there's any reason to actually bring text with respect to the MPA monitoring and evaluation in the charter.
Okay, so you think that's okay the way it is? Yeah.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the goal is that the MPA program or any other programs that may be developed in the future could sort of broadly fit under what the mission of the work group is trying to accomplish. All right. I'm going to move on to the objectives where it gets a little bit more specific. Again, these are just taken directly out of the document that I sent you. So again, these are all things that we've talked about. And I won't read them, but I'll kind of step through the idea. There's facilitation and coordination. Now, some of these get a little bit more specific because I want to get some feedback on this as to whether or not this is something that the folks on the call think that the work group should or shouldn't be doing. So the second one, for example, which is providing specific recommendations, right? About, what are sort of kind of some primary protocols or indicators we collectively should be thinking about. The third bullet has to do with this idea of a clearinghouse, something web-based where there's information on various programs, links to various programs, links to data or case studies, things like that. The fourth bullet has to do with this idea of best practices. We hear this a lot from our agency partners about having some recommendations or best practices that they can use in the various programs. And then, of course, the collaboration and forum for ongoing dialogue and sharing of ideas. And then the last bullet is something that the council has prioritized appropriately across all of the work groups, is to make sure that we're operationalizing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusivity principles throughout all of our activities. And this is something that the council is striving to do across all of its work groups. So those are kind of the major objectives that we've identified as a starting point. And so let me stop there and get some feedback from that, specifically on some of the ones that are a little bit more, not so much prescriptive, but a little more directed, I would say, in terms of providing recommendations and establishing best practices, and the clearinghouse and how people are thinking about whether those are appropriate or not. Okay, go ahead, Rosemary. I see your hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, thinking about that clearinghouse in particular, it seems like there's a lot of similar websites, portals, things out there that are designed to, in one way or another, be clearinghouses and web portals for various overlapping types of environmental data. And I guess figuring out, would this group really need to create something? Or my recommendation would be see if there is an existing portal that we can perhaps add to that stops, yet another portal from getting created.
So maybe put that that third bullet maybe in gray for a while until we do a little bit more background research.
Yeah, or just pivot it slightly to find an appropriate portal to put those things on rather than creating something from scratch.
Got it. Okay, great. Doug, go ahead. I see your hand up.
So I'm looking at this and thinking, is there a way that we can utilize this to streamline permit conditions? I mean, if we're having these, discussions with agencies and we're doing all this work, if we're doing restoration projects in multiple wetlands, how can we make sure that they're going to, approve this style and this meets the objectives overall? It's that streamlined permitting thing is a big thing.
Yeah.
How can we make this work for that?
Yeah. So I'll open it up to some of our agency folks, not to put anybody on a spot, but I think, Doug, if I'm understanding your question, the idea is if we were to provide some recommendations for, say, monitoring, could that streamline the process by saying these are things that everybody's agreed are the things that you should be and should do, and so therefore that might streamline the process for individual projects. Is that the idea? Got it. Okay. So Rosie, I see your hand before I get to that. Any reaction, again, with no commitment implied, but any reactions from our agency partners on that?
This is Jonna with the Coastal Commission. I mean, I think that we are, wanting for straight up restoration projects and the effort to cut green tape, and an organization or a group like this would be highly respected with their recommendations. So I think it's definitely possible that the regulatory agencies would be amenable and receptive to recommendations for monitoring methods. Yeah.
Great.
That
Thank
sort
you.
of builds on what I was going to add to what Doug said and to what Jonna said, is that I think we want to be clear about which of these are recommendations versus which of these are required by various agencies, because I can see where this can be a really helpful sort of menu aspect to pick and choose depending on what your restoration project is, and to make sure that people are collecting data in consistent ways. But I can also see where it could become burdensome. So I'd like to see, think about it in both of those ways.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And just to reiterate, something Nick Marano said at the beginning, the council as a whole has no regulatory role, and so I think anything that we would do would be clearly advisory and recommendations versus anything binding. So I saw Jeff, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just thinking about that second one, right?
Mhm.
Which we thought a lot about.
Yeah,
and
can you
some of it's
introduce
probably
yourself just in
wordsmithing.
case folks don't know who you are?
Oh yeah, sorry, Jeff Crooks, Huron River National Estuary Research Reserve. Yeah, thinking about that second one and what it could actually mean if interpreted strictly, like that word consistent, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Is that
Yeah.
we always struggle with this, and we've been, I like the intent of it, but just consistent, is there a different way to frame this?
Right.
I mean, you could potentially even leave out the word consistent, scientifically defensible and coordinated or comparable or something like that. Because we all know it's really, really hard to sort of get at consistent.
Yeah.
And I guess the other comment about that I would say too is, and I understand the specific charge, but it's probably more than just water quality management action, right? It's restoration or I think we can think about this more broadly too.
Great. So I'm just jotting these down so I know Janice. So yeah, so I understand definitely the conundrum, right? Jeff, you and I have worked on this a lot, the idea of consistency. And so we can think about either unpackaging that word a little bit, perhaps, or just taking it out. I'd be interested what other people think about just focusing on consistently defensible, or and then definitely broaden water quality management actions. But I'd be interested what other people think about this consistency idea. But I see Valerie's hand up, so let me go to Valerie next, and I'll go to you, Christine.
Hi, yeah, I'm Valerie Vartanyan. I work at Naval Base Ventura County at Point Mugu. I'm the wetlands manager, and I like what Jeff just said, and I agree. So I don't know, and words are important, but maybe comparable is better. So there's two aspects of that for me. So as a manager, I would like to collect enough scientific data that really gives me an outline of what's going on so I can do better management. But the other part is that I also want to be connected to a larger community. And if we're not collecting it in a comparable way so that it's usable, then I don't feel like I'm doing, the world a justice. So I don't know if comparable is good enough. But I understand the concept behind it. So yes, I want to make sure our data is comparable, at least with other projects that are going on, so that we can share, both ways. And then, for that. And the other thing too is going back to the restoration projects. One of the things that we've come up with is that sometimes we might have a mitigation that's required, and so we're always looking for projects off base for various reasons, and there aren't any, or it's hard to find them. And so having kind of going back maybe to what Jonna was saying too, it'd be nice to know like who's got some projects like maybe shovel ready or just in need of funding. And that we can, kind of support projects off base as well. So I don't know if there's a forum, that could be set up for that, to include that idea. Over.
Right. Yeah. So the idea of that, the second to last bullet, we could either expand that or add another bullet that talks about identifying project opportunities or opportunities for partnership on restoration projects themselves, or something along those lines. Okay, Christine.
Thanks, Christine McCraft and Macase Long Beach. I've been involved in some of the efforts you guys have heard about this morning. My feedback is probably not shockingly similar to Jeff's in the idea of dropping the word consistent, but adding something that supports the idea of well documented, right? Because I think that we realize that we can do a lot of sharing across data sets, or at least making decisions about sharing across data sets if if the requirement is appropriate metadata, which I guess is what I was referring to as well documented, as opposed to mandating a consistent method.
Great, thanks. All right. Okay, so let me take a few minutes here. Other comments I have 3 level. I'll summarize these before we leave this slide, but any other comments on something, an objective potentially that's missing that we might want to include? So we already have kind of expanding this idea of potentially identifying opportunities for actually sharing or collaborating on projects themselves, right? Versus just the information about the projects, which is, I think, what Valerie was saying.
Well, and maybe Eric, before I lose you, I did have one other question in there. Like in here, and this gets to, and I forget who brought it up, but sort of the cutting the green tape idea a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's room in the objectives of here to add a bullet that's more than just facilitating coordination involved in the assessment efforts, but to expand that bullet to something that's like a pre-review or something that makes projects shovel ready easier.
Yeah.
I know that that may be beyond the scope of what we can call for in the charter, but if agencies are participating in assessment efforts, maybe there's some way that they can help streamline or get us to shovel ready sooner when there is a plan or.
Yeah.
Isn't that something that the Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project does with their work plan, sort of, and so there's overlap there.
Yeah.
But it's involved with a lot of people, making decisions. So just bringing that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know whether that becomes aspirational in our objectives or one that we then want to quantify and have to do, but
it also kind of answers Valerie's concern about where are other projects that might be offsite mitigation for the base. Those projects have been vetted that are on the work plan and probably could be partnership opportunities for the base, potentially.
Yeah. So let me see what people think about this. As an interesting idea. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project, which is a consortium of agencies operating in Southern California to work together on regional wetland recovery efforts. And it's not restricted to just the estuary, it's broader than that. But the work plan that they're talking about is it's basically a process that happens every other year where the agencies come together. People can apply to have projects put on the work plan. And the idea is if projects are on the work plan, the agencies have collectively agreed that they should be prioritized or that they're good projects to move forward. And so the idea is to help potentially streamline project selection. And so there could be conceptually an analog at a state scale, although I'm not sure what the mechanics of doing that would be. And this goes back to your aspirational comment, Christine, but it could be, something that the work group could think about as to whether that's something that is helpful or whether there's maybe regional efforts that feed into a statewide effort along those lines. So maybe something for people to think about.
Eric, we've got a lot of good conversation going on in the chat.
Okay.
I just was going to summarize that it looks like we have a lot of discussion around all of these ideas of portals, and there's lots of good, as you can imagine, conversation around how does, Eco Atlas work? Could there be a technical portal alongside a portal for the public to access data? Could we have more data visualization tools? It's basically all the stuff that we all want, but it's very technical challenge. But I just want to say that there's lots of good conversation going on, and we probably want to make sure that that is encompassed in one of our objectives with a focus on portal development or portal crosswalking between, we've got a lot of comments in here about Eco Atlas and CDN and things like that.
Great. Okay, super.
And then maybe the difference between a technical portal for data entry versus a public facing portal as well.
And then Eric, what about an objective focused on coordination with either the other work groups, specifically the wetland group I don't know if there's a beaches group, but just adjacent habitats that aren't within the estuary. So any kind of beach monitoring efforts, which might link nicely with the estuary monitoring or any kind of watershed monitoring that would flow into the estuaries.
Yes. Great. That's a good one. All right, so all great suggestions. So what I have, and I know Jan's taking notes, but just to summarize, we have a lot of discussion around this bullet with the clearinghouse and the web portal and kind of rethinking that in terms of better coordination with other existing portals. We have some discussion about reframing the consistency to being well documented, comparable metadata, sort of rethinking that a little bit to be a little bit more practical, as well as expanding the goal beyond water quality management actions to include restoration. We had some discussion around including an objective that the work group provide a forum to identify specific opportunities for collaboration on projects, and not just the information, but identifying projects that could be either offsite mitigation or collaborative restoration efforts, things along those lines. And then also Kevin's comment about coordination with other work groups of the council that may have some crossover objectives as well. So those are all things that we can incorporate into a revised version of the charter that we can circulate back around to the group and allow people to iterate on the specific words, because I know that words matter. But are there other broad concepts that we should touch on before we move on? Any other ideas that people want to put on the table, or things that we should discuss with these bullets? It won't be your last opportunity because we'll provide a red line version that people can react to. But Jan, is there anything else in the chat that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, keep
Oh,
thinking
the
on
last
it.
one. Oh, never mind. Nope.
No, go ahead. We're good.
No.
Hey, Eric, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about the songs, San Dieguito project, and how we have been thinking that it'd be nice if there were places that were monitored on a regular basis that could be the general reference sites for other projects. And it's been kind of an idea thrown around. And I don't know if this group would want to talk about having locations that are good reference sites for different projects. It gets tricky because there's always nuances for every project that's case by case, but we did make the requirement for the San Alejo Lagoon to use reference sites that were used by the San Dieguito project. And I don't know how that, I've not been following that very closely, but it probably brought up, so Doug might have some thoughts on that, but it did have some probably positive aspects to it, you know, using data that's collected and it's free, essentially, maybe not so free, but and also then some needs to choose specific reference sites for your particular project. But I just bring that up as I don't know all the objectives of this group, but most projects you need to compare your results to other projects to see if it's, you know, meeting success criteria. So just putting that out there, I don't know if that would be another objective or just throwing that out there.
Yeah, so let's get some reaction to that. One thing, John, I might say is that we can think about that. I love that idea, and whether it's more appropriate as an objective or more appropriate as kind of a product of the, you know, could fit under the products of the work group as well. So Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I think that's a great sort of segue of like, you know, what we struggle with, you know, people that are doing like large scale restorations, you know, it really falls to what the agencies are asking us to do. So, you know, we have our internal metrics that we're trying to meet with the lagoon, and then now we have these external that we're trying to meet with other systems. And I think that's great because when we're trying to look across the board at, you know, 3 or 4 reference sites, it helps us determine whether we're actually we're going to be successful on this. So I really think it's, it ties that sort of permit issue that I was talking about back into maybe, we're trying to meet regulatory permits. And if we can have an overarching methodology to do that, then I think that's a huge thing.
Okay. And would
And
you
Eric-
see that, I'm sorry, Jen, Doug, would you see that more as an objective or as like a product of the work group?
Well, I would like to see it as an objective, but it may be a product. And it's probably both.
Okay. Right. Great. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just gonna say that we're getting support from that in the chat. And both being a product where we could tie, where we could list all, like a lot of sites and decide what's referenced to those sites and tailor it to more of a restoration project requirement.
I do know that the Songs Project in CAT, and I don't know if Rachel's on here as well, but they have made a huge effort with the data to make it publicly available, the reference sites, that all the metadata, and even, you can get the raw data to compare to what you're collecting. So that's not my wheelhouse at all, but I know that Dave Wong on that project has, Ellen Katz putting it in the chat. So that data is available.
Great, super. And then one thing I will add, and I see Katie Nichols is on the phone, but the Wetland Recovery Project is going through or just starting an effort to sort of define what do we mean by reference and what constitutes a reference site, at least for the Southern California region. So there could be some opportunity to leverage that maybe at a statewide scale and think about when we say reference, what are we really talking about? And how does that define, and how might you figure out what sites could be included in a reference network? So I don't know, Katie, if you wanted to add anything, and then I can come back to Doug. I don't know if that's a new question or your hand's still up from before. Katie, go ahead.
I don't really have much to add.
Okay.
I kept thinking about jumping in, but it's all kind of been said. A lot of the folks on the call are involved in that, developing regional monitoring metrics for Southern California, which I think it's great to, make sure all of these things are broadened out statewide when we can.
Okay, super. Okay, so we can work on the wordsmithing. It sounds like there's general support for having an objective that talks about this idea, as well as potentially a product being potentially some list or map of candidate sites for reference across the state.
Hey, Eric, can I just add one thing?
Of course.
That I think perhaps a lot of what we're talking about here is really crosswalking project monitoring with ambient monitoring and trying to figure out how to really crosswalk the two of them and make them as efficient as possible. And it's really challenging to do that in so many California estuaries with, that are so urbanized and impacted. But I think a lot of the existing, frameworks that are being developed, like, the EMPA framework and the Southern Bight and WRMP are doing this. And I think, I'm really excited by everyone coming together and saying how, valuable that kind of a crosswalk would be. So, maybe if we can be explicit about that in the charter, about how we crosswalk ambient and project monitoring, that'll help guide us. That'll be like our North Star.
Yeah, super.
Yeah, I see Rosemary in the chat. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Once you dive into the details, it's actually tough more complicated than at least than you would think to crosswalk the two. But I think with the brains on this work group, we can do it.
Yeah, well, and a little bit it goes back to what Jana and Doug and others were talking about is if you have things that, like we've seen this in the STREAM program, for example, where you have things that are developed through ambient monitoring programs, which then trickle down into the project specific monitoring, which actually can help streamline permitting, right? Because you have sort of a regional set of consistent approaches or comparable approaches that then trickle down into the project specific monitoring requirements that wind up in permits, so it can work in that way as well. Okay, anything else before we move on? Is Jen, anything else in the chat that we need to?
We're just getting a lot of +1s, thumbs ups. I think that Christina did a nice job summarizing the crosswalking, and I think it's looking like that would be a great objective, with maybe a product being more of the Sentinel site reference site ideas.
Yeah, perfect. All right, great. So I'm going to move on. And then I think Nick Martirano is on the phone, but I'm hoping that he can pull down the chat log at the end and send it to us for the meeting notes. So
Yeah, I'm hoping you're getting stuff, because I'm only getting like 50%
okay.
all over.
All right. And again, this is not the end of this conversation, because we'll revise the charter and people will have a chance to look at it again. All right, so this is the last slide on the charter. There was the last section of the charter talked about membership and representation. And I took this language from charters that other work groups have used. So I just wanted folks to take a look and make sure. And I think the idea behind this is that these work groups are generally open and inclusive. And so with sort of we want them to have broad representation, and that with some of the other work groups of the council, as they get kind of deeper into their work, they form ad hoc or standing subcommittees sometimes to really delve in. Like the wetlands work group, for example, has a number of standing subcommittees that work on specific issues. And so that's always an option that these work groups can pursue. For example, we just talked a lot about reference and Sentinel sites. You can have a whole ad hoc group sort of dive into that. And so sometimes we can have these subcommittees that of interested folks that can work on a topic and then kind of report back up to the larger work group. So again, this is taken right out of the Word document I sent you. Any comments on the idea of membership representation? Generally, the work groups are pretty open. People can join by subscribing to the email distribution lists. I know the council and the state are transitioning off of the LIRA system to a new system. So hopefully at the end, Nick can say a couple words about that. But any comments on this? No, I think this is fairly straightforward language from other charters. Okay, let's transition, because the next two slides, hopefully we'll have some more conversation about. We've already had some conversation. So the next slide is on, and this is again, just a very preliminary brainstorm by a subset of us just to get conversation started. But the idea is trying to envision what some of the longer term products might be. And then the next slide that's going to come after this is sort of initial work items, like some of the first things we might think about taking on. So this list is not obviously inclusive, but it's just intent to foster, kind of get the brain moving at this now almost midday. So just looking for some reaction. We talked about these are things that the work group could produce. The second bullet talks to some of the discussion we had earlier about this, what we called interoperable set of assessment tools, which is again a little bit different than consistent. The work group could endeavor to produce some sort of report card, because one of the goals is to think about what the overall health of estuaries are at a statewide scale. Reporting on accomplishments of public investment, listing highest priority management interventions by state or region based on the data that we collect. We talked about one of the key goals of the council is to make it easier for the public to interact with the data and the information that we collectively produce in our programs. So there could be some efforts to help facilitate that through web-based tools. And then the forum. Now, we've also already heard in our conversations about these ideas of the reference sites and Sentinel sites, and potentially having that be a product of the work group as well. We can definitely add that to the list. But I want to stop here and open it up to see if there's longer term products that people might envision that the work group should be thinking about that would be good things for us collectively to produce, say, over a period of years into the future.
Eric, one thing I would add to this list is a process or the ability, maybe this is just the ability to resurrect legacy data sets. What we're finding with the WRMP is that, because we have such a limited amount of initial funding, that a lot of the initial value of the program is likely going to come from bringing in older data sets, doing limited new data collection, and using this new data collection to bring these older data sets to life and get a better sense of long-term change. And in a lot of cases, these are data sets that maybe like, stuck on paper reports in someone's, drawer somewhere, but it's really valuable. So I think given all the monitoring that's been done of estuaries all over California's coast for decades, all these little patchwork projects, identifying those high priority data sets and bringing them into our science framework could be really valuable.
Yeah, I like that. So identify, resurrect, and prioritize legacy data sets. Great idea. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick cautionary note on report cards, even though it's on quotes, and partly that's colored by the fact that I work at the Tijuana Estuary, where we have some issues. But I've been involved in several of these efforts, and sometimes, often I found them to be less than satisfactory. There's so many nuances and there's so many things going on, and it's hard to know how these things might be used and whether they can take a life of their own. And if something gets a low score, what does that mean? It means we should write it off. Should it mean more investment? It's the sort of thing we've talked about before. I like the idea of like inventories with, listing opportunities and constraints and that sort of things, or a characterization of the sites. But when it starts getting into report cards and that kind of thing, I get a little nervous.
How do others feel? I mean, again, this is a first cut. So is this something that people think we should strike off the list and maybe revisit at a later time, or how do others feel about that? Everybody.
Well, there was some conversation earlier in the chat just about the definitions. I can't find it for the moment, but of what a condition score meant and how they would be utilized.
Yeah.
So maybe the term report card and condition index or something is something that we need to think about what that word is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but to Jeff's point, I think we've talked about, we often don't know what that score is too, right? Like I can't tell you how many fish we've talked about in the OPC project are the right fish, or how many we need.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that the next slide as a short-term project goal that we had, Christine, was to make a list of definitions and terms. So surprise, our brains are similar.
Yeah. Yeah, and then maybe we decide what that word is, something that leaves some sort of comparable index or status report or something like Christine.
Yeah, Kirstine just said in the chat, state of the estuary report, more of kind of like the state of the bay.
So there's some kind of word choice there. Rachel, I see your hand up. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, almost afternoon now. I'm Rachel Wigginton from the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. I just wanted to bring back up the idea of cutting the green tape and then the analogous efforts on like Cal EPA side. I just feel like since we have so many of the different regulatory agencies already coming together in this group, it would potentially be a mixed opportunity to like not somehow include that in our products. So I don't know if it's something like, maybe that falls under the like ongoing awareness on that last bullet, but at least keeping folks in the loop about like any new developments that come out of that, and then potentially if there are specific projects around which it makes sense to do some more directed coordination in support of those cutting the green tape initiatives.
Yeah, I like that. So I really like the idea of both. I'm involved in one of the other work groups in the environmental flows, and one of the things that work group often does is have some time to talk about potential or emerging changes or regulatory or policy changes, just as a way of promoting awareness and discussion. So I like the idea of the work group not only providing a forum for that information exchange, but maybe identifying opportunities for that type of regulatory streamlining, since we are all, as you said, Rachel, collectively together. Maybe that could be, it could either maybe even go back into the objectives where we look for those opportunities based on the dialogue we have for that regulatory streamlining.
One thing Coastal has been concerned about is not being too I guess, liberal on cutting the green tape, in the sense that, hey, we want to do monitoring that gives us results where we can report. So with no net loss of wetlands, we want to be able to be talking about how many new acres of wetlands have been created in the state, and be able to, talk about ecological lift and improvements too. But we've definitely been talking about mitigation versus restoration, and being a little bit more rigorous on mitigation projects and success criteria we haven't come up with any defined answers, but wanting to be, promoting restoration and not as rigorous in our permit requirements, to be more open. Hey, we want people to be doing restoration, and hey, the cost is so high, right, to monitor and all that. So just wanted to point that out, that we do want the monitoring results for reporting.
Yeah, and John, that may tie back into some of this discussion about kind of state of the state's estuaries or something. So maybe it's not a report card, but something like state of the state's estuaries that could help with that.
Hey, and can I just respond to that really quickly, Jonna? I really appreciate the distinction between voluntary restoration and mitigation. Certainly, I think the Water Board feels similarly, that, we, most likely want to have a structure where we hold mitigation projects to stricter standards than voluntary restoration projects. That being said, at least what we're observing in the WRMP, and something that might be an outcome of this statewide effort, is recognizing that a lot of the value of these science frameworks is shifting monitoring burdens from project-specific level 3 monitoring to regional level 1 remote sensing techniques. And just recognizing that a lot of restoration projects, they really have to cross particular physical and ecological thresholds before that really intensive site-specific commitment of level 3 resources is justified. So I think if this group can broadly come up with recommendations for permit requirements that, provide a menu of, cost-effective regional monitoring strategies, and then identifying some really clear thresholds that would then justify the investment in level 3 monitoring, I think that's something that would be valuable to a lot of stakeholders on this call.
Thanks. Great. Okay, great. Other thoughts? So I've got some great ideas about, and again, this, Christina, your comment before sort of ties back to some of our earlier discussion about kind of recommendations that can help streamline the whole process, make the monitoring, the money that we invest in monitoring well spent, in a sense, versus, right? Because there's always this tension, I understand, but, we know there's a tension between dollars to actually get stuff done on the ground, and the dollars required to monitor and assess and adaptively manage these sites. Other comments? As Jan said, I'm gonna transition to the next slide, which is more of like the shorter term. So these are more sort of aspirational long term. And again, this can be a living list, right? And so it might be something that at the end, we're gonna talk about updating the website, but could be something that we kind of begin to develop this list, or maybe it becomes an appendix to our charter would be another option. And then it can be updated as, without changing the charter, but we can update the list periodically as we come up with more ideas.
Eric, can I just add one last, throw in the big stone? So, I agree, Jonah, to a point, but I feel that mitigation and restoration should actually have the same components. We shouldn't be letting one go over the other. And And really, if it's, you know, restoration, the only person that is like, you know, saving that is the grant that we're getting. And they tend to not fund monitoring to the extent that is needed. And I think, you know, if the regulatory agencies made it clear that it doesn't matter, like we're going to find this happy medium between them, it's better. I mean, we do tons of restoration, and yet we don't get funding to actually monitor these areas. And so I think we're missing on the ultimate goal of what we're doing. So I'd like to see how we, you know, again, bring permitting and funding and even mitigation back into like a centralized way that we're doing the same thing. So sorry.
I guess I'd like to respond. I agree with you, Doug, that I think that we struggle with that level 1 versus level 3 monitoring. And I want to have that conversation, Christina, with you and others, you know, and Doug, to continue that conversation. I know Lauren on here, we would love to have that conversation, but we're concerned that level 1 might not be enough for even restoration projects. And I hear what you're saying, Doug. So to be continued, I'd say.
Great. Okay. Let's go and transition. And this next slide is kind of similar. And so we had these longer term goals, but we also tried to brainstorm a little bit what might be some initial things that we talked about. And so some of these we've already talked about on the call today, which is, it doesn't have to be a website, but some statewide map, list, website of available, like what's going on in the state. So we heard about a lot of great things at the beginning of the call that we didn't present in the meeting. So at least starting at one of the, you know, if we think about some of the first things that the work group might do is just try to bring together the list of what's going on in the state and who's doing what, where, that type of thing. This came up with one of Christine's comments, this idea of maybe coalescing around some consistent classification and terminology. I know this is much easier said than done because I've been involved in a lot of these efforts, but I think one of the things that we struggle with, even, you know, in the world we work in here at SCWRP, you say estuary, and depending who you're talking to, it might mean something totally different, right? And so even just, you know, having some consistency in what we're talking about, you know, ideas of reference and sentinel sites and things like that. We've had a lot of discussion about, I think this third bullet is probably transitioned a little bit now to maybe, again, this research and identification of existing portals that are already out there, what metadata standards people are using, even just to try to understand what is the landscape we're already working in terms of repositories, portals, and data standards, and is there some comparability between those, or can we make those more comparable? And that kind of bleeds over into the next bullet, right? Is this idea of should we create, again, the idea of the starting point is just to increase general awareness of what's going along in the state. And then this last bullet was, this is something that I've heard a lot in working with our agency partners, what I loosely called planning tools, which are, I hear a lot, if I'm making a certain decision, how do I know what monitoring should be required based on the certain type of project or decision I'm trying to make? And can you create some sort of guidance around those, or matrices or lists or something that says, if you're dealing with a mitigation project that's a small lagoon and these are your concerns, here's what you should probably think about monitoring, you know, that type of thing, that again, to just make that a little bit easier. And then that's similar to the second sub bullet, which is, you know, if I have certain questions about a certain function or a certain stressor, what are the appropriate indicators that kind of map back to the types of questions I'm asking? If it's a restoration effectiveness question, what are the indicators I might use? So these are what I loosely term as planning tools, but these could be things potentially in the shorter term that the work group or an ad hoc committee of the work group comes up with some lists or things that we can discuss and see if there's some agreement across the programs in the state. So again, this was just a starting point for discussion. And what I'd be interested in from the group is are there other, in a sense, initial things that people think would be good starting points, with the idea that it's always good to start with something kind of small and easy when these work groups are getting off the ground? We want to start with something small and easy, something we can achieve in a relatively reasonable time frame, and kind of build on that success. So I'm looking for feedback on what might be your top 1 or 2 things that you might want to see the work group work on, say, over the next year, that would be a good product for us to produce. So this is where I need some feedback, or I'll call on people, because it's not beyond me. Right.
Eric, I would say items, well, dots 1, 2, and then the start getting at the very last checkbox,
Okay.
which is getting back to the kind of the green tape issue.
Okay. Yeah, so we have some votes for sort of this, what I'll call just kind of the list of the effort inventory, for lack of a better word, or but the idea of what's going on where, and the terminology, and then
And then relating the questions or whatever it may be to the indicators to help with identifying the most consistent monitoring protocols, which can help with the green tape.
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just that first one seems like a great place to start. To the extent it could even help inform, obviously, the other ones. And maybe if it's a website, you could have links that you could get to the other folks' data. So it almost could be more of a clearinghouse that could inform, the eventual final product in terms of repositories, things like that. I mean, it could be like a Google map sort of base thing, or something where you could click and get to all the different data sources.
Great, super. Stephen?
I was going to just point out for that second bullet, the classification and terminology, to encourage the work group to consider adopting the CMEX, the Coastal Marine Ecological Classification Standard. We've gone down that route here in where do I work? In Oregon, to pull our information together into that common protocol. It's been pretty helpful.
Definitely, and I would say that in the EMPA work, we sort of looked at CMEX, and in the WRP, we've also looked at CMEX as a good starting point. So I think, and that's, again, for those of you who are less familiar with it, it's a good starting point for the classification. And I think the intent with this bullet also is there's probably other terminologies, like Christine brought up. What do we mean by condition? What do we mean by function? What do we mean by reference, right? So beyond sort of the classification, there's other terminology we could think about that we might want to just make sure we're all speaking the same language on those terms.
Yes, and further, if I recall, way back 20 years ago, I think CMEX was piloted for California in Humboldt Bay, Arcata Bay, might have been the whole thing. Bill Penix will know, but I think Mark Finkbanner really did several years of work trying to apply it at least to Northern California. I don't know how far south that's gone.
And I believe it's been applied in the San Francisco Bay Area as well, if I'm not mistaken. Christine?
Yeah, and then I was just maybe in terms of prioritizing, I agree that first bullet of statewide mapping and website, and then it will be much further down the road. I think that then we're able to develop a portal for the data, but the first step would be metadata forms that let you get into the statewide map potentially, right? Dates collected, methods done, things like that, and that might facilitate the eventual development of a portal where crosswalk them.
Yep, I love that. I love metadata, you know that.
I know that. I was just playing to the crowd.
Okay. Does anybody? So we've had some kind of coalescing around these kind of first 2 bullets, with kind of transitioning again to the metadata and then the last check mark on the page, but maybe starting with those first 2 bullets.
We have consistent agreement in the chat. Focus on inventory of resources. I agree with Kevin. Yeah.
All right.
And I was just about to say, maybe in that inadvertently, in terms of planning tools, we're going to be developing places where there's adjacent efforts and places where there's missing efforts and something. So from the statewide map, we might span into
almost like a gap analysis. So,
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, because for sure, and you probably noticed from the map, that we've showed earlier that we already know we have a gap on the north coast where we would love to try to coalesce around some effort in the north coast to help fill that in. So super. I love that idea. Okay, anything that's Kirsten?
Yeah, I was wondering, these are all things that will move along very slowly and be kind of abstract and vague as we work on them, whether a complementary product might be a case study of analyzing one set of data from across the state, like maybe just some example estuaries all along the state for one function or one indicator, and really highlight what you get out of doing that. It's sort of helping us envision the prize at the end of all this. If there could be this statistically robust comparison, but also with direct management implications that shows like, wow, looking at this data, it's clear we need to do action X in the north while action Y is more important in the south or something. I think having like a concrete example would help motivate the energy and the funding.
Super. Christine, I don't know if you had a reaction or a question because
No, that's great. I was just about to say that I think ongoing in the background from another effort, Christine, is that, we had the attempt to do that, to demonstrate like what you could crosswalk or what you couldn't crosswalk, and then what could you conclude from it. That came out of an EPA funded group that we've been doing down here with a focus on Southern California. And we've sort of passed the torch, I would say, to Jan and Kat and Rachel to look at it in a broader scheme. But I think the next step would be then to bring it right back to people in different regions and different functions to demonstrate the utility of that exercise beyond sort of statistical challenges. So, I mean, I guess I love the idea as the next step, and then maybe what we can do from the work that is ongoing is to bring it back and ask people is what did we conclude from our pilot that might be useful to this group?
I think that could be a good subcommittee, Eric.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to chime in, Jan. So.
Oh, well, yeah, because this is like my long-term life goal or something. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Kirsten, I'm super excited about that. Kat in the chat said agreed to. I think that it would be a great subcommittee, and a key would be for us just to pick one function and one type of data and then illustrate it across the state. And I think by leveraging the NEPs, the NERS, songs, some of the EMPA data we have great data sets that we can pull together for that.
Awesome. Great ideas. Are there anything, before I transition to the last part of the meeting, which is kind of more about how we move forward with operating as a group. Any other ideas that we haven't talked about in terms of near-term efforts, long-term products that people want to make sure we have on the table before we transition to kind of how we operate as a group? Anything we haven't already talked about, or things people have been thinking about in the back of their mind that they just want to throw out there? Nope. All right. All right, so the last couple of slides are just, and so we'll get to the end and hopefully maybe even wrap up a little bit early, which is always a great thing. Give you a transition before your next meeting or lunch or anything like that. Because I just want to talk a little bit about, kind of logistics now in these last two slides, which is meeting frequency, format, and leadership. I have a little sub-bullet updating the website. Kevin has graciously agreed to, once his interns and staff are done with a few things that they're working on now, maybe help us with that, and I'll just kind of check that off. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the council has come up with a standard kind of template that they want to use for all of the work group websites, which kind of makes it a little bit easier because we can just drop in some language and some ideas, and these are things that we can build on over time. But I think the idea is that the current Estuary Monitoring Work Group webpage is a little out of date, obviously reflects the previous incarnation, and so we kind of want to revise that to be more reflective of what this work group is doing and some of our objectives. So I think we can work to accomplish that and get some, I think there's some help from the State Water Board IT folks to help us get that taken care of. But so we'll, with that out of the way, I will offer that a lot of the work groups meet quarterly with subcommittees, as Jan alluded to, maybe meeting more frequently as they're working on products. So I wanted to get a sense from the group of, does that seem like the right frequency? Do people want to meet more frequently as we're getting started and maybe transition to quarterly as we get some momentum behind us? How are people thinking about? I know we're all meetinged out, so I don't want to put too many meetings on people's plates. Does quarterly seem about right for folks?
Yeah, I think so, Eric.
Okay.
You got a quarter.
Agree as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll work with Nick on the logistics of that. But now the other questions on format. And so here's kind of the bigger question, right? Is, this first meeting was virtual, and I know we're all largely working in the virtual world now. But is there some of the work groups are transitioning to sort of a hybrid format where either a certain number of meetings per year, maybe every other meeting is in person, always with a call-in option. Some of them are transitioning to, well, they're all hybrid, and so people can go to a location, meet there, and the others call in. So what do people think about the the format being either totally virtual or some sort of hybrid where there is some opportunity for more face-to-face interaction, which I know is always useful and helpful when we can do that. And it can also be those, if we do that, they can be targeted around specific objectives, like maybe a milestone or a product that we're working on where it might be more useful to actually, physically be together. So how are folks feeling about the format?
You're getting in the chat. Hybrid, some in-person hybrid, quarterly with an annual hybrid.
It sounds like there's some support, at least for some in person, and that could either be once or twice a year, maybe it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think one person said moving it around regions. So maybe do a Southern California in person and a SF Bay in person.
Yeah, and that's a little bit the way the council is working right now as well, where I think they go every other and they're moving locations. Okay.
Doug says in person, just so you know.
Okay. I'm a big proponent of in person myself. Because I just think it helps build the rapport and the kind of cohesion among the group.
Absolutely.
So having said that, the next question would be, if we do quarterly, our next meeting would be in sort of the, sort of late June, early July timeframe. I know summer is always challenging for people, right? Between field work and vacations and kids out of school and all that other stuff. So if we do that and we go to something that's a hybrid with an in-person option, are people feeling that we should do that the next meeting or maybe the meeting after that, which would be a fall meeting? How do people feel about that?
You got one fall in the chat.
So say fall in the estuary is always very nice, Eric. Kirstine says we should do a field trip while we're having our in-person meeting, which I totally agree with Kirstine.
Okay.
So,
she's also getting lots of emojis, which I didn't even think you could do. You couldn't even, like, the chat is blowing up.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like fall.
Okay, so like a fall in person, and we'll pick a location where maybe we can build a field trip into it. Or
yes.
Okay, so all right, I love that idea. So the next meeting, which would be July, we can do virtually, and then maybe look for a fall meeting that's in person with a hybrid option, of course, and we'll figure out the best location. Okay. Great. Last logistical thing to talk about is leadership. So Kevin, Christina, Jan, and I sort of put the PowerPoint together for this meeting. But traditionally, and this is not always the case, so the leadership of the work groups varies. Some work groups have a single chair, some have a co-chair. Oftentimes, the chairs or the co-chairs have some agency representation. That's not always the case. So like the molecular methods work group is chaired by one of our staff here at SCORP, Susie Thoreau. So I guess the question is, what do people think? I would personally love to see at least an agency co-chair. I'm happy to help facilitate at least the first couple of meetings to get us up off the ground, but I would love to see at least one or two agencies kind of ultimately step up and help to facilitate the group. So again, I'm not looking for a commitment today, but kind of throwing it out there to see what people think about that idea. And if people feel like it's important to have, or there's value in having an agency chair or co-chair, then I know most of you on the phone, and I will work to maybe twist some arms offline to get somebody to step up between now and the next meeting. But I just wanted to get some gestalt and some feedback about kind of how to structure the facilitation of these meetings.
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm already spread way too thin, so I don't think I would, as much as I would love to co-chair this work group right now, I don't have the capacity for it. I can talk to my management to see who else at RB2 might have the capacity to be involved. Wayne from RB9, maybe we should talk offline. I would really love to see some consistent and widespread participation from our coastal regional boards, not just Region 2. So I'm excited to see Region 9 represented here, but I think us water boarders should maybe talk offline and think about how we can maybe spread the load so that we can effectively engage.
Yeah, and I know here in Southern California, both Region 8 and Region 9 are pretty involved. Region 9 probably the most, because most of our more intact estuaries are in the San Diego region down here in Southern California. So, and Kevin, I'm thinking that maybe from the Central Coast, we could try to see if there's somebody from the Central Coast Water Board that we can involve in that conversation.
Yeah, I should have reached out before this meeting and put them on the list. So yeah, I'll reach out to at least the CCAMP folks and see if they could take part.
Okay.
If not, other people.
Okay. So Christina, maybe one of our action items is to have an offline conversation with some folks from the coastal water boards, coastal jurisdictional water boards, to see if there's some ability to get somebody to serve in that role.
Yeah, or maybe we rotate it. Like I think Elizabeth Pope is on the call from Region 1. Maybe there's a way that we can rotate it somehow or coordinate amongst ourselves. That would be great.
Super.
And we can always do it like the other work groups where one of the co-chairs is from one of our non-agencies, right? Because there's lots of people on the call that aren't necessarily in agencies. And so just making sure we include everyone.
For sure. And I think Jan's referring to like the wetlands work group has a 3 co-chairs. So Kevin's one of the co-chairs representing a kind of a non-agency / research group. And in that case, there's a federal and a state co-chair. It doesn't have to be that way, but in that case, there's 3 co-chairs. So it spreads the workload out a little bit more. All right, so good. That's a good action item for us to follow up on. All right, here's my last slide. So we'll probably come in under the wire. I always aim to finish meetings early, is always a good thing. So I put Nick, I took this right off the website. I'm hoping that's still the right contact. But if you're interested in participating, you can definitely contact me, reach out to me. There's also Nick Martirano's email as the statewide coordinator. I don't know, Nick, if you wanted to say anything about, is there a process in place for signing up for listservs with the new listserv process?
That should all be the same. So there's go to water boards and there's the subscriptions option, and you click there, and then it's under general interest, and then you'll see Water Quality Monitoring Council, and every work group has its own list. You check a box and put in your name and email, and then press OK. You can select multiple things if you're so inclined. Everything else should be basically the same. The transition already happened. It's just a little bit of growing pains from Lyris list to Gov delivery. So, and the emails come out a little different. They look more like bulletins, and like I can't forward things as easy as I used to. So, but as far as signing up and all that stuff, that should be all straightforward, and I can drop the link in to the chat.
That's great, super. Yeah, and so if you're not on the list, or you know people who you think might want to join the email distribution list for this group, you can go in through the Water Quality Monitoring Council website, and Nick will give us the link, and you can sign up that way. And so you can share that with your colleagues who might be interested. Super. So we already talked about the website. Then we're going to work on that. And I think the idea is once we get a first cut on that with some of the kind of structure and language, we can share that with the work group for some feedback and some input as we develop that. We got a lot of great input on the charter. And so one of our key action items is I'll go back and working with Jan, I know who's helping with the note taking, and we'll do a red line version of the charter that incorporates a lot of the discussion that we had. And Nick, maybe if it's easy, if you can pull the chat log off of Zoom and send it to us, that would be helpful. And then what we'll do is we'll send the red line version of the charter back out to the group. And that way people can think about the specific verbiage and language. And at the next meeting, in the summer meeting, we can hopefully work to finalize the charter and clean up any loose ends or any language issues we need to talk about. We talked about a number of work items. I have my email up there. So yeah, Nick, go ahead.
Did I set up the Zoom meeting, or did you?
I thought you set it up, but maybe I did. I don't know.
I think you're the host. I think maybe it's a script account, and in that case, I don't have any ability.
I downloaded it already, Eric. I can send it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kevin.
And Kevin, the participants too, if you can.
This should come out.
Oh, no, you can't do that. I think, Eric, this is our Zoom.
Okay, I think our IT folks, Paul, maybe we can talk to Paul about that, Jan.
One of the questions I'm getting, and maybe this is for Nick, is everyone that's on this call already added to the CEMW listserv? Or how do people check that they're on the listserv?
So I had downloaded the most recent, before they made the transition to the last amount of people that were on it. I sent it to Eric, and then he sent me a separate list. I don't think you crosswalk the two, but if theoretically, if you're on this call, then you're on that list. I can send out a test, and then I can download the what it looks like now, and then send it to see if that's the right amount of people on there. But I don't think you can. There's no way for somebody to go, am I on the list, unless you go to that subscribe page and just sign up. And then it might tell you, actually, this new system might actually be able to tell you what list you're signed up for.
My suggestion, Nick, is if in doubt, because I think you're exactly right. I had a list that I had developed just based on people, we're working with, just our existing partners, and I had sent that to you. And I don't know if those people were necessarily on the old Lyris list. So my suggestion would be, is if you're not sure, go ahead and sign up using the list, right? And it'll.
And I just looked. This new system has actually kind of got a cool feature. So take that link up in the chat. You put in your email address, and it'll show you everything that you're subscribed for.
Perfect.
It'll have a box check to it. So that's probably the best way to do it.
Perfect. All right. That way you can. Thank you. That's perfect. Great. Awesome. Yeah. So that was a good way to make sure that you're on the list and can get the emails. I put my email address up there. If you're interested in working on one of the priority work elements that we talked about, so the helping us with the effort inventory, or maybe getting involved with some of the terminology, or this question indicator protocol crosswalk, when we send out the meeting notes, we'll have a list of the priority items that we talked about today. And as we said a couple of times at the beginning of the call, these efforts are largely, we all have day jobs in a sense. And so we're doing this on top, above and beyond a lot of the things that we do during our 9 to 5 period. So really it depends on, people working together and kind of chipping in and taking on some of these as part of something that they're already doing or related to. So we're always looking for help for people to work with us to develop some of the first cut on some of these preliminary products that we've talked about. So if you have an interest in that, or maybe you have students or interns or folks like that who might want to get involved with any of this, And these are always, I think, always great opportunities for kind of early career people or students that are getting started to get engaged with some of these efforts and help them kind of build their network and get more involved. So just reach out to me if you're interested or you know folks who might be interested in helping out with some of these initial things. And then as we talked about, our next meeting will be in the early July timeframe. It'll be virtual and we'll look to have sort of an in-person hybrid meeting in the fall timeframe. So that's our sort of set and a set of action items. And then the last one, obviously, that I didn't put on this list because it just came up was the one Christina brought up, which is some offline conversation with some of the water board staff about leadership. So any, before I close out the meeting, any other comments, questions, suggestions? No. Okay.
Thank
what
you, Eric. I said thank you.
Okay.
Holding all this together.
Yes, well, my pleasure. And I wanted to also just say thank all of you. I've been involved with a lot of the work group meetings over the years. And, it's oftentimes you just have, presentations and crickets, right? And so I just want to thank all of you because I thought we had really great dialogue, really great conversation and interaction, super great ideas, a lot of enthusiasm about moving forward with this. So I wanted to thank all of you for just the participation and the energy and engagement, because I've been in a lot of these meetings where it's kind of really silent on the other end, especially when we're virtual. So I appreciate all the engagement from folks. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up a little bit early, which is always a good thing. We'll work on the meeting notes and send those out, and then we'll look to follow up on some of these items between now and July. And I know a lot of us work together, so we'll see each other, between now and then, but we'll come back together as a group in July timeframe. All right. All right, with that, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Right. Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was confused. Sorry. I think that you guys might be the hosts of it.
Okay.
They should be able to get the participants pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to our IT folks because I think you're right. I think maybe I had them set it up for us.
Or it might be the biology account, Eric.
I looked in the biology account this morning. It wasn't there, so we'll ask our IT folks. Yeah, I checked out, Jenya. All right, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you. Bye.
All right. Take care.
Okay. See ya.